You're listening to The Social Workers on WCDB Albany.
Welcome to a special segment of the Social Workers Radio Talk Show. I'm your co-host, Alyssa Latmore. Today we're here with the authors of the new book titled Production of Disaster and Recovery in Post-Earthquake Haiti. We have UAlbany School of Social Welfare professor, Dr. Loretta Pyles, and also a UAlbany School of Social Welfare alumna, Dr. Juliana Svistova.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for having us.
So before we jump into the questions, I'm going to share brief backgrounds on each of you to highlight your expertise in this area. So Dr. Juliana Svistova earned her PhD in social work and MSW from the University at Albany. She is an assistant professor in the Department of Social Work at Kutztown University of Pennsylvania. Her scholarship is concerned with community development and participatory approaches to social change in local and transnational contexts. She also studies organizational dimensions of policy implementation and practice. Dr. Svistova has a focused interest in disasters, interpretation of natural disasters, and resultant policy, practice, and grassroots responses to these events. She is a community-engaged, interdisciplinary scholar in the fields of social work, policy, public health, and education. Dr. Loretta Pyles is a professor at the School of Social Welfare at the University at Albany and is also a yoga and meditation teacher, workshop leader, and organizational consultant. Her new books are Healing Justice, Holistic Self-Care for Changemakers, and the book that we'll be discussing today. Her research on disasters and resilience has been funded by the National Science Foundation. She is also the author of Progressive Community Organizing, Reflective Practice in a Globalizing World, and co-editor of Holistic Engagement, Transformative Social Work Education in the 21st Century. So very good backgrounds, very good bios, and I'm really excited to hear about this new book that you guys that's just published. So let's just jump right in. What are the main findings of your study about post-earthquake Haiti?
Yeah, it's a really exciting, I think, piece of scholarship, and it comes out of our work studying the discourses of disaster. So we're looking at media discourse, NGO discourse, policy discourse, and our key finding is really that disasters are socially produced based on the systemic conditions that exist and the historical patterns that prefigure the disaster. And so we argue in it that basically what's happening is what we're calling a disaster industrial complex, that the disaster is used as an opportunity to further the agendas of elites, and it's not as participatory and needs-based as we would tend to want to think it is in terms of the real needs of survivors.
Mm-hmm. So based on, we have very extensive amount of data that we analyzed, and we have been doing the work from 2012, starting in 2000, actually after the earthquake. You got involved first, and we analyzed texts and discourses of different actors involved in disaster recovery, and we're finding a lot of patterns around how people were engaged, local people were engaged in disaster recovery or lack thereof, how some of the social relations and what we call neo-colonial relationships were perpetuated through some of the practices, like local people earning the money on a local level, while international foreign workers who came in were making money based off their country, how the division of labor was split up. So local people were cleaning the toilets and cleaning the rubble, while the foreign workers were supervisors and administrators and leaders, so to speak. We also found a lot of really the importance of discourse and the embedded power in the discourse is what we want this book to communicate, that we shouldn't be pushing away, oh, narratives don't matter, we shouldn't be discussing this, we need to act, right, because it's disaster, and we need to address it immediately because it's a crisis situation. But it seems like understanding narratives, understanding discourses, understanding the images that are perpetuated about people in the developing world, about developing countries, is very important in what actions we take and what policies are developed. And that, I guess, for us is one of the most important findings, and I guess that's how we contribute to social work literature and disaster literature as such.
And maybe I'll jump in and give an example of that. And so what we find, and we found this in our study of other disasters, is that more and more we're seeing militarized interventions into disasters. We see military show up. In the case of Haiti, the United Nations already had a presence there. But other foreign militaries showed up. And in terms of the discourses, we would see lots of discourses of Haitian earthquake survivors as looters, or they're violent people, or, they're so hungry they're going to do anything when they bring the relief to them, that they're going to be hostile. And so all of these narratives, we argue, contribute to, are part of this social production of the disaster, in that they pave the way for military intervention. So when you have these stories of people, these kinds of images, then it makes sense from a policy perspective. Oh, well, then of course we need military in there to keep the peace, to keep people under control, etc. So that's part of it. And then we argue that paves the way for some of the kinds of profiteering that goes on in Haiti, in terms of people coming in and seeing it as an opportunity to make money off of the disaster, and creating what many people call a new Haiti. Rebuilding and building back better, rebuilding Haiti, and this narrative is another kind of narrative that we question. Building back better for whom? In whose under whose agenda?
And what does better mean for whom? Right? Mm-hmm. There are so many ways to interpret it from different angles, and not necessarily everyone agrees on what better is. And that was one of the other findings that we. That was revealed through our analysis of the documents.
No, this earthquake, you just said it was 2012.
2010, actually.
2010.
Yeah, it's been 8 years.
8 years, and the impact is still being felt today. And this book, you're using Haiti, but this can be applied, I'm sure, to all of the, there's been so many disasters since that time, and how is the aftermath? What is the aftermath for the people there? I'm sure this can be applied to other types of disasters in other locations.
Absolutely, yes. The developing countries, absolutely, and how disasters are handled when we're talking about vulnerable people, people who are poor, and how situations are handled in those kinds of contexts. But also, the study started as a comparison to New Orleans and to Louisiana in the effects of Hurricane Katrina. Mm-hmm. And it was interesting that we saw pretty similar narratives in the media, particularly to how disaster was portrayed and constructed in Haiti as well. So certainly it does apply.
And yeah, we're very interested in looking to see if our theory of the disaster industrial complex is going to apply in other contexts. As you know, there was a very hefty hurricane season this last fall between Texas, Florida, and Puerto Rico. It was sort of unreal, and we saw many of these things playing out just as observers noticing the way the media portrays those realities for folks, and how that impacts the interventions that happen. And Puerto Rico is a really good example of very vulnerable population not getting the resources they need. They're still struggling with electricity, and of course other things as well. So yeah, we think it's very very relevant.
So why Haiti? I mean, there's been so many disasters. What was particularly about Haiti that was an interest to you?
Yeah, well, actually, I always had an interest in Haiti. When I was a graduate student, I remember reading about Haiti and reading about the culture and the spiritual and religious traditions there, and about the revolution. And so I was always intrigued with Haiti. But interestingly, the story is that in 2010, I went to submit all of my materials for my tenure case, and I turned all my materials in. This was January 2010. And I had built my case on Hurricane Katrina. My whole tenure case was a lot of publications around Hurricane Katrina. And I thought, well, gosh, what am I going to do now? What am I going to focus on now? And the very next day, the Haiti earthquake happened. And I just got really intrigued with what was going on down there. And a couple weeks later, a man named Father Joseph Philippe, who's a Haitian priest, came to Albany. He came to UAlbany on the Uptown campus, and he gave a talk about what was going on. And it turns out he has a long-term relationship with the Archdiocese of Albany, and that there'd been a partnership all these years. And I went up to him after his talk and told him I do research in disasters, and is there anything I could do to help? And he's invited me to Haiti in that moment. And so I went to Haiti a couple weeks later. And when I got there in February, there were still aftershocks from the original earthquake still happening, and it was just a profoundly impactful experience for me in terms of not only, of course, the extreme devastation of the earthquake, an earthquake that is estimated to have killed anywhere between 60,000 up to 300,000 people. No one really knows. And then just starting to learn more about Haiti in terms of the Haitian people and the beautiful geography and the culture, and getting to learn all about the solidarity and strengths in those communities. So that's how I got involved.
And then in 2012, that's why we mentioned that date, Loretta got a National Science Foundation grant, and I have been bugging her to work with her. So when I was a PhD student here at UAlbany, and she graciously hired me to be coordinator / research assistant for the project. My interest is, I'm originally from Latvia, and I consider myself a global citizen and very much interested in international social work and international social development. And so the fit was pretty good right there. I actually went with Loretta on a study. It was school-related trip to New Orleans in 2009. And so there was that, relationship there, and common interest. And I was really excited to learn and work in a different culture, combine my education as a doctoral student and research. And I think I had the best experience in my cohort.
I mean, just the background, it's not like you just wrote a book and had you've been from the beginning, Loretta, involved and invested in understanding what was going on in Haiti and actually going there and having this connection. So can you see that in your book a little bit?
Definitely. Yeah, it comes through. Yeah, even though interestingly we do focus on kind of data sources that aren't necessarily based on our field work, we have anecdotes in here about our field work and our relationships. And I think, I don't think we could have done a book like this justice without having been there. Juliana just came back from there. She just took a group of students there. So we've been able to continue to nurture the ongoing relationships that were started back in 2010. So I think that's one of the messages of the book, is how important the nurturing transnational partnerships are, because I think part of the problem we see with NGOs are they come in, they're kind of fly by night. They come in and they assess and they do a little bit of programming and then they leave, and it's not really based on real needs and real authentic partnerships. So I've been so inspired by Juliana continuing this partnership.
Yeah, in 2015, our partner organization asked me to do consultancy research work for their organization. This year, they wanted me to bring students and to have Haitian students and my students all together in a higher level education learning environment, and we continue the work. It's not necessarily earthquake related anymore. It comes in here and there, but I think people have moved on and are not bringing it up, or I don't know. It's different. It's now the future is there. How do we nurture this partnership? And we have started, perhaps as one of the positive sides to this great tragedy was the opportunity to build relationships and nurture it, and I don't know, keep introducing people to Haiti and exposing some of the injustices, and keep making people fall in love with Haiti.
So why do you think scholarship on disasters in a place like Haiti is important at this moment in history? I mean, we kind of touched on it a little bit, but is there anything that you want to add about why this is such an important piece of research right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think clearly, it's 100% clear that disasters are getting more frequent and more intense, and that particularly vulnerable people, marginalized populations, are going to be the ones most impacted by disasters. And Haiti is an example of a place that is very vulnerable to disasters. They're actually vulnerable to other disasters, hurricanes and tropical storms and that sort of thing. So it's a very disaster-prone context. And so, yeah, I think with climate change, we're going to be seeing more and more disasters. And I think we need to learn about what goes on in disasters, and in terms of prefiguring the disaster, what are the systemic factors that make people more vulnerable to more intensive impacts of disasters, what's going on there, as well as the recovery process and the ways that we can do that in a way that's more empowering and more attending to people's real needs.
One of the other things that I think is important to emphasize, and that also is coming out of our findings, is the lessons learned about interventions and solutions that were put in place after the earthquake, right? Again, going back to that, we need to act quickly. It's emergency, it's crisis situation. We need to do something right now to sort of resolve it so it's not an eyesore, so that people feel content, right? So there is, blaming, doesn't happen. So some of the findings that we revealed is that solutions that were applied were kind of solutions that have been used in previous situations, maybe not necessarily in disasters, but they were old failed solutions that are used again and again, maybe presented as either new wine in old bottles, or old wine in new bottles, whatever way you want to look at it, and it's just not working. You cannot keep putting let's build a factory and create jobs as a solution to a disaster, post-disaster recovery, situation. So, or perhaps some of the approaches that Red Cross uses, which is very emergency-like, and that's their focus. But perhaps we need to focus more on sustainability. We need to really think, how do we not perpetuate some of the social relations? How do we not perpetuate vulnerability of people, vulnerability of the environment? Mm-hmm. How do we rebuild houses so that we do not destroy the environment even further to create new disasters soon to happen?
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I've been watching a lot on the news with all the disasters with Puerto Rico and everything that's been going on. And the news, the mainstream media only gives us, little bits of information. It doesn't give us anything clear, close to the whole picture. And I've been going to a lot of the workshops on campus and presentations of individuals who've been going to these places and saying, what needs to be done. And that message is not always given to the main public. Unless you're going and sitting at these presentations or reading a book, sometimes that information isn't gotten across to individuals, like really what's going on there and why are things happening so slowly and why is everything going on. So what's the message for social workers? What message will this book give to social workers? Because as social workers, as we're trying to make change and become change agents in our society and internationally, what do we need to know to help us with, the future disasters and even still dealing with the disasters that happened 8 to 10 years ago and that are still recovering?
Well, social workers, have been working in disasters for a long time, but, probably not enough, and our presence isn't really felt as much as it could be. We have a real value added that we could be bringing to disasters in terms of a lot of our skills and framed by our values. And I'm thinking in particular, of course, social justice and being able to understand the unique needs of marginalized and vulnerable populations in disasters. Our emphasis on cultural competence. This was a big issue in Haiti. Many of the outside NGO actors didn't understand the collective-oriented culture of Haiti and the way that decisions are made and work is done there. And so the programs and interventions that they were bringing in, not only were they not very participatory and they were very top down, but they weren't, culturally competent and really relevant to those communities in a lot of cases. And then finally, I'll just mention the value of self-determination. And so we really value self-determination in social work, and yet from a global perspective, the rest of the world seems to think they know what Haiti needs, and oftentimes are not really valuing their own sovereignty as a nation. And so I think social workers could be a voice for this self-determination as well.
Mm-hmm. I think it ties to participatory processes, right? We saw a lot of rhetoric around participation of local people. We need to get them involved, but actually in practice it seemed more like people were excluded or not authentically involved, right? You can say we're engaging people, but then they are, again, cleaning toilets and cleaning rubble, right? Some of the meetings were held in English, so people could not participate authentically because they didn't speak the language, or there was at the United Nations or other organizations buildings, there was security where people were not. So plenty of that. But I guess for social workers, it's related to the idea of starting where the client is. So let's listen to what people's priorities are, what people's concerns are. Let's prioritize what we would address first, and really investing in these genuine, authentic, participatory processes, because we know, and we have heard stories of local citizens sabotaging some of the efforts if they were not listened to. And yes, don't come to me and say this is what I need, this is what my problem is. I can tell you what our problem. We are the experts, and coming from that standpoint, for social workers and any other recovery actor, really, I can't stress it enough, really. And I think the other thing would go back again to perhaps social workers could pay more attention to narratives, images, discourses, and all the power that really is embedded in this, and how all the rhetoric, narratives, images, stories that we tell about places and people, how they feed, how they get wired in our brains, and they just stay there and get invoked, right? When we hear Haiti, what do we imagine, right? And how important it is to understand that power and to expose it and undo it, and build other narratives, build empowering discourses, and based on that practices to really help people.
So what then are the opportunities and challenges that lie ahead for social workers with regard to the themes of environmental justice, disaster, and displacement?
Well, it's interesting you asked this right now, because we just had a really, I think, successful environmental justice panel on campus 2 days ago here at UAlbany, and really beginning to have a more in-depth conversation about what social workers can do in relation to environmental justice. I think as folks know that environmental justice is now a competency that the Council on Social Work Education is mandating that social workers be trained in. And so this kind of work, we think, fits in well and importantly into that. And so, social workers need to be educated in terms of understanding the causes of environmental injustice, in terms of looking at our current economic system and the way that plays into it, as well as, the impacts of environmental injustice. And again, particularly how vulnerability is socially produced in our communities. And then, of course, the interventions. What are the interventions that we need to be engaged in? This includes not only the relief and recovery work, because as social workers, we're always naturally going to respond when there's a crisis. But what about before that? What about the disaster preparedness? What about sustainability in communities in the first place? Food justice, that sort of thing. So there's lots of work to be done on this topic for social workers and everyone in the community.
Right, I agree. We're entering as a field. We're entering a completely new terrain for social workers. Particularly here in the United States, it has been in the radar for social workers around the globe, and we're very familiar with the literature in Australia, Canada, anywhere in the English-speaking world, but in the United States, we're just starting. And I really think that the CSWE putting environmental justice as one of the competencies is really exciting, because now we can require environmental justice content to be taught in the classrooms. But I feel like we need preparedness. I have heard social work educators asking in a cynical way, well, what are you saying, that environment and nature is going to be our new client? Those kinds of things we need to work with. Mindsets now, and I think social work classrooms will be an important starting point, and educating the educators as well as to what that means and how it might look like, and how our profession can get involved and what we can do.
Well, I think this book is a great start for helping to raise awareness and helping people become more familiar with really what is going on. It's not what we always see on the news. That's probably not a correct, accurate portrayal of really what's happening. So this book, which again is titled A Production of Disaster and Recovery in Post-Earthquake Haiti, Disaster Industrial Complex. It can be purchased, I'm assuming, on Amazon or some other different types of websites.
Yeah, and the Routledge website as well. It's published by Routledge in their Humanitarian Studies series, and you can find it there.
Right. Again, today was a special segment of the Social Workers Radio Talk Show where we had the authors of this new book, Dr. Loretta Pyles and Dr. Juliana Svistova. So thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Alyssa.